Hi there, my name's LaDonna, and I was the one left out. At my dad's 65th birthday party, he raised a glass and said he was proud of all his kids. Except the loser. That loser was me. The worst part? No one flinched. Not my brothers, not my mom, not even the aunt who used to braid my hair. But that moment, it didn't come out of nowhere. It was years of silent digs, stolen credit, and being told art isn't real work. They even lied about my mother being in the hospital just to paint me as absent. I walked away that night. But what came next? They never saw coming. Why did I come back 2 years later with a surprise that flipped the power dynamic forever? What happens when the loser finally wins? I parked a block away from the venue. It was intentional, gave me a few extra minutes to brace myself. The March evening in Austin still had a hint of spring chill, but my palms were damp. I could already picture the inside. My father standing tall, holding a bourbon like it was a royal scepter. My brothers grinning as if they'd just returned from conquering empires. I'd been invited, of course. Politeness demanded it. But I knew damn well I wasn't expected to show. When I stepped into the event space, a private rental near the Capitol, all exposed brick and gold-accented chandeliers, the laughter hit first. Loud, unapologetic, familiar. People in crisp suits and pastel cocktail dresses buzzed around tables lined with steak and scallops. I scanned for a familiar face. Carver was across the room, holding court with 3 men in tailored suits. Colby leaned against the bar, sipping whiskey, whispering something that made a younger woman shriek with laughter. No one noticed me. No one said hi. Until they did. A server pointed me toward the family table, long and white-clothed at the far end of the room. I walked slowly, not wanting to seem eager. Lester, the man I once called Dad without flinching, was seated at the head naturally. His silver hair was styled with surgeon precision, and his navy suit looked custom. When he saw me, his smile didn't falter, but his eyes gave me a once-over that said, "You really showed up." I nodded at him and slid into a chair near the end, just close enough to hear, just far enough to be forgotten. That's where they always kept me, like background furniture. The wine was poured, toasts began. My older brother Carver went first. "Dad, you've built something most men only dream of. Patients trust you with their lives, and we've all learned from the way you lead, with discipline and precision." Applause, laughter. He smiled like a man who knew he'd already won. Next was Colby. "Happy birthday, old man. You taught us how to make things happen, how to command a room. Your legacy is right here," he said, gesturing at himself. "Your sons." The clinking of glasses. More laughter. Even the servers chuckled. My name hadn't been spoken. Then Lester stood up slowly. He adjusted his cufflinks, tapped his glass twice. The room quieted. He didn't look at me once. "I won't drag this out," he began, his voice smooth, practiced. "I'm proud of what I've built, of the boys I've raised. Carver, a respected heart surgeon, and Colby, whose tech startup is already on its 3rd funding round. They've carried the family name forward, just like I hoped they would." My throat tightened, but I kept my face blank. "And I'm proud of all my kids, except the loser." Laughter erupted. Actual, full-bodied laughter. Someone gasped. Someone else clapped. Aunt Eleanor, half drunk on rose, leaned over her martini and said loudly, "Oh, Lester, who could you possibly mean?" Everyone turned. I mean everyone. Their eyes burned holes into my skin. Some pretended to look past me. Others whispered. Colby smirked like he'd just scored the winning touchdown. Carver looked suddenly fascinated with his napkin. I didn't flinch. I wouldn't give them that. Instead, I reached for my glass, half full with Pinot Noir, and raised it slightly. My voice came out clear and steady. "Thank you, Dad. I needed the reminder." His smile cracked, just slightly. I didn't wait for dessert. I stood. No one moved to stop me. I walked through the maze of chairs, past the buffet table, past the valet stand. My heels clicked like a metronome on the stone walkway outside. The moment I hit the sidewalk, I exhaled. Not because I was relieved, because I knew I wasn't going back. Not to that table, not to that dynamic, not to that house where silence was louder than screams. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't post anything cryptic online or text a friend in all caps. I just drove. Out of the city, out of their orbit, into a version of myself I hadn't yet become, but was ready to meet. They called me the loser. They were about to find out what losing really meant. By the time I made it back to my apartment, the city had quieted into that strange in-between hush, after bars close, before garbage trucks start their rounds. I kicked off my shoes, left them in the hallway, and dropped my keys onto the counter without turning on the lights. The space was dim, familiar, safe. I changed into a t-shirt, pulled my hair back, and sat on the edge of my bed. That's when I heard it. 2 soft buzzes from my phone, still buried in my purse. I didn't want to check. My body already knew. The air changed. I fished it out, tapped the screen. The message glared at me under his name. Hope you finally learned your place. No punctuation, just that, like he was giving a final grade. I stared at it for 5 minutes. 10. My thumb hovered over reply, but nothing came. Not anger, not even sadness. Just a kind of freezing stillness, not the peaceful kind. More like standing in the middle of a winter field, alone, wind biting through your coat, knowing no one's coming. I set the phone down, face down, let it hum again. I didn't care. Instead, I walked to the closet and pulled out a dusty box from the back shelf, the one marked old sketchbooks. Not even labeled properly, just scribbled in black marker during a move 5 years ago. I sat cross-legged on the floor and opened the top one, the corners still curled from age and neglect. The pages smelled like graphite, glue, and forgotten versions of me. And then, without warning, memory hit me like a door slamming shut. Senior year. I had come home from school early, hands trembling, heart racing, with a thick envelope from CalArts tucked in my backpack. Not just acceptance, a full ride. Tuition, housing, materials, all covered. My guidance counselor cried when she heard. She said, "This is the kind of thing that changes bloodlines." I waited until dinner. I wanted it to be special. Lester was home, still in his white coat, unbuttoned at the collar. My mother was making baked chicken. Carver was at the kitchen counter reading about new residency placements. Colby was watching something on his iPad with the volume up, as usual. I slid the envelope onto the table, careful, like it was sacred. "I got in," I said. "CalArts. Full scholarship." For a second, no one said anything. Then Lester picked it up, read the first line, and without a word, ripped it down the middle. Right there at the table. 2 neat halves. Then he dropped them into the trash like junk mail. "We don't raise dreamers in this house," he said. "We raise doctors." That was all. My mother didn't look at me. Just stirred the green beans like her wrist was stuck on loop. Carver blinked but said nothing. Colby laughed, really laughed, and said, "Guess somebody's going to be sketching under bridges." That night, I didn't eat. I locked myself in my room, closed the blinds, and curled up on the floor. I didn't cry then either. I just stared at the ceiling and thought, this is what silence feels like. Cold, total, unwelcome. The next day, I stopped bringing my drawings home. When assignments required art portfolios, I left mine blank or lost. I stopped talking during dinner. I smiled politely. I learned to disappear in plain sight. At 14, I started babysitting neighborhood kids to earn money for art supplies. I hid the receipts. I kept everything in a shoebox under my bed. And still, they called me the lazy one. Back in the present, I flipped to a page in the sketchbook I'd been avoiding. The one with the half-drawn self-portrait I'd never finished. I looked older than I remembered. Harder. I picked up a pencil. Below the sketch, in clean lines, I wrote a single title. My Place. I started shading. The strokes were slow at first, deliberate, then faster. The tension in my shoulder melted into motion. The lines sharpened, shadows deepened. Somewhere between the jawline and collarbone, I realized I wasn't angry. I was reclaiming space. By the time I finished the first outline, the sun had started to rise behind the buildings. The city stretched itself awake, oblivious to the clarity forming in my hands. I set the pencil down, not because I was done, but because I'd started something. For the first time in years, I didn't need anyone's permission to take up room. I made coffee the slow way that morning, boiling water in the kettle, hand-grinding beans, pouring in a steady spiral like it mattered. Maybe it did. Maybe it was my way of holding on to something steady, something I could control. After I poured the last drop into my chipped mug, I sat by the window, sketchbook still open beside me. But my mind wasn't in the present. Not anymore, because no matter how many exhibitions I booked or how many pieces I sold, I could still hear his voice, clear as glass. It was a Thursday, senior year. We were halfway through dinner when Dad started his usual routine, doting on Carver, questioning Colby's stocks, measuring each of their futures like a portfolio. Then he turned to me. "So, what are you planning next year?" he asked, chewing slowly. I wiped my palms on my jeans under the table and looked up. "I want to go to CalArts," I said. "I want to be a concept artist." He froze, mid-bite, set his fork down, gently. The silence was immediate and cruel. "Art?" he said, not even blinking. "That's trash work. You'll be nothing." Colby burst out laughing. "She picked art because she couldn't pass chemistry," he said, elbowing Carver. "Let's be real." I didn't respond. I didn't have to. The look on Dad's face was worse than anything Colby could have come up with. It wasn't anger, it was contempt, pure and simple. Mom reached for the salt and mumbled, "Your father's only worried for your future." Worried. That word scraped. Not disappointed. Not furious. Just worried that I wouldn't fit the brand. That his daughter, the youngest, the soft-spoken one, would color outside the lines and embarrass the family name. I pushed my plate back and stood up. "I'm not hungry," I said. Dad didn't look up. Colby smirked. Carver never looked away from his glass. I remember going upstairs and sitting on my bedroom floor, back pressed against the door like it was the only thing keeping the world out. I pulled out my sketchbook and started to draw, not a portrait or a landscape, just jagged, dark shapes, angles, shadows, fury and heartbreak in pencil. I didn't have words, so I used lines. That night, something inside me changed. I stopped asking for permission. The next week, I applied to CalArts behind their backs. Every recommendation letter mailed from the school counselor's office. Every portfolio piece scanned at the public library. I forged my mother's signature on the FAFSA form, not out of rebellion, out of survival. Because I knew, if I didn't leave, if I didn't chase something that was mine, I'd disappear. And I was already halfway gone. Fast forward 12 years. Present-day Austin. A spring afternoon. I was standing inside my favorite art supply store. Small, independent, no frills. The smell of paint and sawdust always grounded me better than any therapy session ever had. I was browsing brushes when a young guy at the register glanced up. "Sorry," he said, squinting. "Are you LaDonna Bishop?" I turned, surprised. "My girlfriend's obsessed with art," he said. "She showed me your catalog from the Austin Contemporary. That charcoal piece with the broken window frame? Unreal." I smiled, polite but distant. "Thanks. That was a personal one." He nodded like he understood, but he didn't. Because as I walked out, plastic bag rustling in my hand, I heard Colby's voice again in my mind, sharp and oily. "Not smart enough for anything real." That line had never left me. It showed up in boardrooms, during pitch meetings, even in quiet interviews with thoughtful critics. No matter how far I'd come, how many cities my art had traveled through, how many publications had listed my name. His voice still knew how to shrink me. I walked 2 more blocks before I stopped in front of a mural I'd painted last year, one of my first public commissions. I stared at it, hand on my hip, the wind brushing hair across my cheek. It was bold, bright, not perfect, but real. And yet, even standing in front of that proof, something inside me still whispered, what if they're right? The thing about family is they know exactly where the cracks are, because they helped make them. A week or so before my father's birthday party, we gathered for what was supposed to be a simple family dinner. The kind my mother insisted on planning a few times a year, hoping, desperately, that food and wine could fill the silence our name couldn't. It was early spring, and we met at a modern bistro off South Congress. The kind of place with linen napkins folded too precisely and overhead lighting that made every plate look like art. The irony didn't escape me. I arrived 10 minutes early. Rookie mistake. The hostess walked me past marble-top tables and couples on awkward dates to a long booth tucked near the kitchen. Dad was already seated, glass of Cabernet in hand. Carver and Colby flanked him, both in button-downs, phones on the table. Mom sat at the far end, adjusting her scarf like it could protect her from the conversation to come. No one stood when I walked in. Dad glanced up and said, "You look tired." Not hello, Not, I'm glad you came. Just that. Tired. I smiled anyway and slid into the seat across from Colby. Dinner moved quickly at first. Small talk, travel plans, a new surgical technique Carver was helping develop. The usual professional parade. I didn't say much. I wasn't sure if I was invited or included. It wasn't until the entrees arrived that Mom cleared her throat and gently, almost apologetically said, LaDonna had a gallery show last weekend. Her first solo. I saw some pictures online. It looked beautiful. My fork paused halfway to my mouth. She looked at me then, almost afraid, as if she'd done something brave. Colby gave a low whistle. Carver kept eating. Dad smirked, then raised his glass like he was offering a toast. I've doodled better things during surgeries, he said. That's what passes for art now? The words didn't land like a punch. They landed like a scalpel, precise, practiced, meant to slice clean. A few chuckles followed. Carver gave a tight smile. Colby grinned. I blinked. It was about identity, I said quietly, and silence. How families make noise by pretending not to see. Dad waved me off. You're still playing pretend, LaDonna. Grown adults don't color for a living. He laughed then, a full laugh, real, loud, free, the kind of laugh he never gave me. I stared at my plate, fingers curling around my napkin like it could anchor me. Then came Colby, of course. He leaned back, sipping his cocktail. Wait, he said, snapping his fingers. Didn't you paint that red and black abstract? I gave it to one of my investors last year. I froze. That was from my private sketch folder, I said slowly. Colby shrugged. Technically, you're my sister. Close enough. No, I said. You told him it was from your girlfriend. A silence fell over the table. Brief, awkward, intentional. Relax, he said, still smiling. You got the exposure, didn't you? Dad chuckled. If she's lucky, maybe next time he'll pay her in crayons. No one said a word in my defense. Not Mom, not Carver. Just more wine, more chewing, more shifting in their seats like I was the one ruining dinner. I felt the napkin tear in my hand. I hadn't even realized I was clutching it that hard. I didn't make a scene. I didn't yell or storm out. I waited until dessert menus were passed around, then quietly excused myself. In the Uber ride home, I stared out the window, replaying each word like a recording I hadn't asked for. They had taken everything they could. My ideas, my credit, my voice. That night, I unfollowed every sibling on social media, deleted the family group chat, blocked notifications from the shared calendar Mom still tried to update with birthdays and holiday dinners. Then I opened my laptop. Every file, every folder of art. Password locked, new names, backed up twice, uploaded to a secure cloud. Colby wouldn't steal from me again. Nobody would. They could laugh, they could dismiss. But that night I changed the rules. From that point forward, I would no longer explain, no longer apologize, no longer offer what hadn't been earned. They didn't even know it. But something inside me had just slammed shut. The week before the birthday party, I found myself sitting at Carver's oversized kitchen island, picking at a plate of fruit I hadn't asked for. It was a Sunday morning, one of those spring days in Austin where the sky looked filtered and the breeze pretended to be cooler than it was. Carver had invited the family for a planning brunch, though I knew better than to think my presence meant much. The real purpose was to finalize details for the upcoming hospital fundraiser gala, the one Dad was hosting to celebrate 35 years at his clinic. I wasn't surprised to see Dad arrive with printed agendas, nor when Colby brought a laptop and began sharing screen mock-ups for the event's donation portal. Carver poured everyone coffee like a polite robot, his eyes never meeting mine. Wendy, my mother, tried to smooth it all over with the softness she'd mastered through decades of being married to Lester Vaughn. Maybe LaDonna could design the poster? She said mid-sip, voice light but hopeful. Her work has that fresh feel. People remember color. The pause was deadly. Colby barked out a laugh. We're not doing a paint and sip night, Mom. Dad didn't even look up from the itinerary. We're raising money, not decorating a dorm wall. The words didn't sting. Not exactly. They curdled, like expired milk in the back of your throat. I stared at the walnut grain of the counter, willing myself not to react. I'd done this dance before. Let it slide. Keep the peace. Be the bigger person. But then, Without any fanfare, he twisted the knife. "You're 33, LaDonna," he said, flipping to the catering section of the packet. "You still rent. You don't own a home. You don't even own your work." My neck turned warm. My jaw clenched so tight I felt the bones grind. "That's enough, Dad." The silence that followed cracked the room in half. Everyone froze. Wendy's fork hovered mid-air. Colby raised both eyebrows. Carver set down his mug slowly. I hadn't said those words, those exact ones, since high school, since the last time he'd made me feel like nothing in front of everyone who mattered. "You don't get to insult what you don't understand," I said, voice steady. "And if you do it again, if you keep belittling me in front of this family, I won't show up. Not here, not at your events, not in your world." He didn't answer, just blinked slowly, like I was a stranger speaking a language he hadn't learned because he never thought he'd have to. Colby cleared his throat. "Anyway," he said quickly, "the venue's asking about AV equipment. I'll handle it." Carver nodded, picking up the thread like a lifeline. The conversation moved forward. The room didn't. The air was heavier than it had been just moments before, and for once it wasn't mine to carry. I stayed through the end, but I was already gone. The moment my car door clicked shut in the driveway, the weight in my chest cracked open like a shell. Wendy followed me out, clutching her purse like it had answers. "He didn't mean it," she said. "Yes," I replied, looking her straight in the eye. "He did." And worse, he believed it. Back at my apartment, I dropped my bag by the door and walked straight to my desk. The sun lit the corner of the room in sharp angles, glinting off my sketch tools. I didn't touch them. Instead, I opened my journal, the one with the frayed ribbon and stained corners. I flipped past pages filled with hopes I'd never voiced, plans I hadn't dared share. Then I wrote one sentence. They don't get another free shot. Not at my work. Not at my dignity. Not at me. No more letting them borrow my silence and sell it as submission. No more letting them weaponize their disappointment. I wasn't looking for permission anymore. That afternoon, I drafted an email declining attendance at the fundraiser gala. I cited work obligations. It was clean, polite, irrefutable. They would talk, of course, they always did, but this time, I wouldn't be in the room to hear it. A few mornings later, just after sunrise, I was in the studio with my sleeves rolled and pigment dust in the air, mixing the deep ochres and rusts for a commission. The light was hitting the wall at an angle that made everything feel cinematic, warm and suspended, like the world had paused for a breath. My phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but something in my gut told me to answer. That strange tug. Familiar. Uneasy. "Sweetheart." My mother's voice drifted through the speaker like she was speaking from the edge of a dream. Soft, careful, like she was trying not to disturb something fragile. "I just wanted to tell you in person," she said. "Your painting, the one with the red branches and gold overlay, it was selected for that cultural exhibit in Berlin. They called the house because they couldn't reach you." I froze, brush halfway to the palette. My breath hitched. I remembered that piece. Finished it at 2 a.m, working under lamplight. My hands cramped, eyes blurred. It wasn't a popular one online, too abstract, too jagged, but it meant something to me. That's great," I managed. The words felt distant, like I was reading them off a cue card. There was a pause, and then, that tonal shift in her voice I'd come to know too well, subtle but unmistakable. "Your father's here," she said, and the warmth drained from her tone like light down a drain. "He wanted to say something." A warning wrapped in politeness. Then he was on the line. "So I guess the Germans ran out of real artists," Lester said, his voice flat, sarcastic, bone dry. "Good for you, though. Bet that fake money spends just like real money, huh?" I didn't respond. Didn't twitch. I just let it land. "Just remember," he added, "those people love to check boxes. They don't care what's on the canvas, long as it fits the quota." I ended the call, not out of anger, but because I was done. There wasn't a single syllable left in me willing to play along with that script. I wasn't shocked. I wasn't even surprised. I was simply finished. That night, I packed 3 boxes. Only the essentials: hard drives, sketchbooks, canvases I couldn't replace, a chipped mug I'd bought during my first solo trip. I canceled my family's data sharing plan, changed passwords. I created a new business email using the name I'd used back in college, an alias I'd once adopted to submit to galleries anonymously, to avoid judgment linked to my last name. By sunrise, I had deleted myself from every family contact thread. Group chats, planning chains, calendar invites, shared cloud folders. Gone. No goodbye, no theatrics, just absence. The following day, I toured a one-room loft on the east side. Brick walls, old pipes, no central air. But the windows were wide, and the light poured in like hope. I didn't even finish the full walkthrough. I signed the lease on the spot. That night, I grabbed tacos from a food truck and sat on the cold concrete stoop of my new studio, dinner warming my lap. The city moved around me like a living thing, traffic lights blinking their slow rhythm, dogs barking from balconies, someone laughing hard from a rooftop nearby. My phone buzzed. Wendy, Mom. Call me when you get a chance. I know you're upset. Just want to hear your voice. I stared at the message, the cursor blinking, waiting. I didn't reply. Not because I hated her, not because I was punishing her, but because I knew what would happen. I'd hear her voice. I'd remember the softness. I'd feel the pull again. And I'd fold. And this time, I couldn't afford softness. Not now. The next 2 weeks passed in deliberate silence. No posts, no stories, no curated quotes about boundaries or rebirth. I didn't need the world to see my peace. I just needed to live it. I repainted old works I'd abandoned months ago. I walked unfamiliar streets with no headphones, just ambient noise and my own breath. I drank burnt coffee at corner cafes and made awkward small talk with baristas who didn't know my last name. I accepted a collaboration offer from a young sculptor who didn't care about where I'd come from, just where I wanted to go. The silence wasn't loneliness. It was space. Mine. In permanent marker, thick and unapologetic, I scrawled a single sentence across the raw plaster of my new studio wall. I don't owe them access just because we share blood. That was my anchor. Wendy called 3 more times. I let each one go to voicemail. Her tone changed slowly. At first it was gentle, then pleading, then quiet. The last voicemail she left was only 9 seconds long. Just breath, no words. Eventually, even the silence stopped coming. And then, one evening as I was priming a new canvas, it hit me. Not with drama, not with ache, but with clarity. I didn't need to win the argument. I didn't need to explain myself, or justify the path I chose, or perform success like a medal ceremony. I didn't need to offer closure to people who built their comfort on my silence. What I needed was distance. Real, unspoken, unreversible distance. So I disappeared, not to hide, but to become who I was always meant to be, without interruption. 2 years passed in silence. No holiday visits, no surprise phone calls, no accidental run-ins. The distance I'd built between me and them wasn't just emotional, it was surgical. Then, in early spring, a square white envelope slipped through the mail slot of my studio. It was from my mother. No frills, just clean black ink on cream cardstock. Lester Thomas Bennett turned 65. Join us in celebrating his legacy. At the bottom, in her handwriting, you don't have to speak, just come. For once I didn't overthink. I texted back, I'll be there. The country club sat 30 minutes outside the city. Too far to walk, too close to ignore. I wore a sleek black dress and heels sharp enough to slice tension. My hair was pinned back with minimalist precision. No statement necklace, no dramatic eye, just me, just clean. I arrived alone. As I stepped through the grand glass doors, a ripple passed through the guests like someone had opened a window during a sermon. People turned. Some blinked like they were seeing a ghost. Others looked away like they'd just been caught staring. Colby was at the bar, retelling a story for the 3rd time, judging by the bartender's bored smile. Carver stood with a cluster of administrators, laughing too loud. Wendy sat near the front table, smiling a little too quickly when she saw me. Lester held court near the center of the room, drink in hand, posture straight, charisma oozing off him like too much cologne. I made my way to the edge of the room. I didn't greet. I didn't explain. I watched. The night unfolded with painful familiarity, toasts, laughter, a slideshow featuring family photos, none of which included me. A few people whispered. Someone near the back asked, "Didn't she move out of the country or something?" At some point, Lester raised his glass. "I've had the honor of working with brilliant people and raising exceptional sons. This life, it's been more than I deserve." The crowd clapped. I waited. Then I stood. "I brought something." The room quieted like someone had hit mute. Colby blinked. Carver's jaw flexed. Wendy's fingers clutched her napkin. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a slim black envelope, walked calmly to Lester, extended it. He took it with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He opened the flap, pulled out the document, scanned the heading. I watched it happen, the unraveling, the twitch at the corner of his mouth, the muscle jumping along his temple. This can't be right." "It's correct," I said. "Effective last week, I now own the property at 1180 Blakewood Avenue." Silence. "That's where my office is," he muttered. I nodded once. "It is." He turned toward the crowd, then back to me, voice tight. "You bought the building?" "No, my studio bought it. LaDonna and Frame, my company. We worked with an international arts endowment. They needed tax shelter. I needed leverage." Carver sat down, visibly pale. Colby looked like he'd swallowed a cherry pit. Lester's eyes scanned the paper again. "You're bluffing." I leaned in just enough for only him to hear. 2 years ago, you said you cut me off. I just made sure it was mutual." I didn't wait for applause. I didn't raise my voice. I turned and walked out. The valet recognized me from a mural I'd painted nearby. He handed me my keys without a word, only a smile that didn't ask questions. As I drove down the gravel path and away from the estate, I didn't look back, not once. Because power, I'd learned, isn't always about yelling louder. Sometimes, it's about waiting long enough to speak when it finally matters. They didn't listen when I begged. They didn't hear me when I warned. But now, if they couldn't hear me when I was quiet, they'd feel me now that I was loud. I parked outside my studio just after 9. Gravel crunched beneath the tires as I shifted into park, but in my mind, it was still his voice I heard. Lester, my father. The last words he spoke echoing like a curse that wouldn't lift. "I'm proud of all my kids, except the loser." He didn't even flinch. Just said it like it was fact, a casual wound. The party hadn't even hit dessert yet. My sisters in jewel-toned dresses, their kids running around with cake-stained fingers, and Dad holding court at the head of the patio table like some retired king surveying his legacy. Except for me. I left before anyone could say my name again, before they could follow up that moment with something worse. Silence, indifference, or worse, forced small talk. Inside the studio, I didn't turn on the lights right away. The air smelled like old paint and turpentine. Familiar, comforting. I dropped my keys in the ceramic bowl, the one I made during my first year at art school, the year they said I'd wasted my potential. I walked straight to the back room, the one with skylights and chipped tile. My largest canvas waited for me there, still unfinished. I'd been working on it for months. Layers of bold color clashed and curled like smoke frozen in motion. It was abstract, untitled, just like this season of my life. I stood in front of it for a long time, but I didn't reach for a brush. My hands weren't restless for color. They didn't want to create. They just wanted stillness. The kind of stillness that doesn't demand anything, doesn't ask you to smile or explain, doesn't care if you're winning. So I sat, on the old wooden stool with the cracked vinyl seat that wobbled slightly. I stared at the canvas, or maybe through it, letting silence stretch around me like a weighted blanket. That night, I didn't paint. I let the ache settle, let it live with me. In the morning, I woke to a message from Jules, my cousin. "You okay? Did you see what Colby posted?" My chest tightened. Colby, of course. My brother, the family's golden boy, MD, MBA, and MVP of Dad's imaginary scoreboard. I hadn't seen it. I hadn't checked the family group chat in months. She sent a screenshot. "Guess she can show up to parties, but not when Mom's in the hospital. Funny timing." The words landed like a punch to the ribs. I sat up in bed, heart pounding. Hospital? My fingers trembled as I opened old threads. No missed calls, no messages, no voicemails, just digital silence where concern should have lived. They didn't tell me. They'd chosen not to. This wasn't just neglect. It was intentional. Colby's message wasn't just a jab, it was a narrative, one he expected everyone to believe, that I'd skipped the hospital, that I'd chosen art over blood, sabotage disguised as concern. I messaged him directly. Don't rewrite history just because the truth doesn't serve you. Message sent, delivered, read, no reply, classic. It wasn't just about being hurt, it was about being erased, rewritten as the careless one, the selfish one, the loser who didn't show up when it mattered. Around 1:15 a.m., the phone rang. Not Colby, not Dad. It was her. Wendy, my mother. I let it ring twice before answering. She didn't greet me, just breathed. Then finally she said, I knew you weren't wrong. Her voice cracked, soft and exposed, like it hadn't spoken truth in years. I wasn't strong enough. She didn't give excuses, didn't try to undo the past with reasons. She just laid it out, naked and plain. You deserved better, she said. But I didn't know how to give it to you. I froze. Every time you talked, I froze. I thought silence was safer. I let her speak. For once, I didn't rush to fill the space. You reached out so many times, she whispered, almost ashamed. And every time I chose keeping peace over standing beside you. I held the phone tight, felt the words root in old wounds, not hurting, but softening. I don't hate you, I said, but I had to choose peace too. For myself. She started crying. Not loud, not dramatic, just real. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't moved, but because I'd already wept enough for this story, years ago, in college dorms, in rented apartments, in the back of cabs after rejection letters, but something about her words landed, not as a fix, but a closing, a seam stitched, an edge softened. When we hung up, I placed the phone face down. I didn't check messages. I didn't open the news feed. I just turned off the light. And for the first time in a long time, I slept. Deep and unbothered. Not because everything had been healed, but because something had finally been faced. And sometimes, that's what healing actually looks like. Not applause, not approval, just finally being seen, for real, even if only once. 3 weeks later, the sunlight pouring through my studio windows felt warmer than it should have in late March. Maybe it was the way the glass had been cleaned twice over, or maybe it was the smell of fresh white paint on the walls that made everything feel less heavy. I stood in the middle of my gallery space, now officially mine, not rented, not borrowed. My name was etched on the front window in gold vinyl. Beneath it, Contemporary Concepts vertical bar LaDonna Wren. That day, I didn't flinch when people said my name out loud. I owned it, in every sense. The grand opening wasn't lavish, but it was full. A crowd buzzed with real curiosity, not politeness. Professors from CalArts had flown in. A couple from the local museum walked through with glasses of sparkling water, nodding at every corner. I didn't care about the praise. I cared that every piece hanging on the wall was mine, not borrowed or stolen, not passed off as someone else's girlfriend's hobby. Colby and Carver didn't come. Neither did Lester. But Wendy arrived late, wearing a pale gray coat and sunglasses she didn't take off until she stood in the back corner of the room, silently watching. She didn't wave. I didn't approach her. She stayed until the very end. A journalist from the Austin Chronicle pulled me aside near the catering table. She looked young, barely 23, probably on her first assignment, but her voice was firm. What's one thing you wish your younger self had known? I didn't hesitate. You don't need their love to survive, I said. You need your own voice. She smiled, wrote it down. The quote went viral the next day. It was printed under a photo of me standing next to a vivid, jagged canvas titled No Inheritance. That headline made its way into group chats I no longer opened, into newsletters my family subscribed to, into conversations they couldn't avoid anymore. The following week, I received a voicemail from Wendy. I made tea, she said, if you're up for it. No pressure, no guilt, just an invitation. I went. Her house was quieter than I remembered, not the kind of silence that screams, but the kind that rests. Books lined the shelves I used to dust. She didn't try to fill the quiet. She poured chamomile into 2 ceramic mugs and handed me one. We sat across from each other like 2 women who once knew how to be mother and daughter, but were just now learning how to speak as equals. I read the article, she finally said. I nodded. Let the steam from the tea curl between us. I've wanted to say something for a long time, she whispered, but I didn't know how to start. She looked me straight in the eye. I'm sorry, she said. I know you're not like them, and I never should have tried to make you be. It wasn't loud. It wasn't grand, but it cracked something open. You were never the problem, she added. I just didn't know how to protect you. I set the mug down gently. I'm not asking you to fix it, I told her. I just needed someone to see me. And for the first time, I think she did. We talked about small things after that. Her garden, the neighbor's new dog, a painting she saw once in Santa Fe that reminded her of one of mine. We didn't touch the big topics again. They didn't need to be dissected. Before I left, she handed me a paper bag with fresh rosemary from her backyard. For your windowsill, she said. On the way out, I stood on the porch for a second too long, not to look back, but to let it settle. I didn't take the long way home. I drove straight to the studio, unlocked the front, and opened the windows. The air that came in was brisk and clean. Around sunset, my phone buzzed, a number I recognized but hadn't saved in a long time. Lester. The message was short. I don't know who you are anymore. I stared at it for a full minute, then deleted it. At the next red light, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. I do, I said. And that was the point. Some stories don't end with forgiveness. They end with freedom. Looking back, I used to think being loved meant being accepted, unconditionally. That if I just worked harder, explained clearer, stayed quieter, maybe they'd come around. But here's what I know now. Love without respect is not love. Silence might protect your peace, but your truth deserves space too. And sometimes, family isn't who raised you. It's who rises with you. I'm not the loser they once named. I'm the woman who refused to stay in the box they built. And if you're watching this, maybe you felt boxed in too. So here's what I'd say to you. You are not selfish for choosing your mental health. You are not weak for walking away. You are not wrong for redefining family. You are allowed to outgrow the version of you that made others comfortable. Now I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to walk away to finally be seen? What's one thing you wish you could say to the version of you who stayed too long? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every one of them. And hey, if this story touched you, made you feel less alone, or reminded you of your own strength, comment 1 to let me know you're here. Tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to connect. Or even if this story didn't speak to you, let me know why. Your voice matters too. And don't forget, subscribe if you want more stories like this. Raw, real, and written from the heart. Let's keep growing, healing, and reclaiming our power together.